for a global business update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. First of all, the FOMC minutes last night, the Federal Open Markets Committee last night from the Fed, implied that the banking crisis might well cause a recession in the United States towards the end of the year. The stocks are fairly mixed as they continue to digest this, certainly as far as Asia Pacific is concerned. Specifically, Hong Kong up about 0.2%, South Korea up a little bit, but elsewhere there's very, very mixed feelings about all this. One good thing for China is that it looks like the yuan is being used for its currency is being used for more and more international business, and it's part of this continuing narrative of maybe the Chinese currency replacing the dollar in some areas as a means of international payment. Alibaba shares down about 3% this morning, all because of SoftBank, the Japanese company, withdrawing some of its shares. SoftBank sort of reverting to this defensive position, and it's got out of Alibaba, and it may mean that that shares will fall even further. Obviously, SoftBank being a Japanese technical conglomerate, they do have a thing called a vision fund, which is actually down to make tech investment, but it's decided to pull back on that. China also is featuring, as far as Bank of America is concerned, they're looking for consumption recovery there, certainly as far as high-end goods are concerned, and also China's export figures, particularly for electric vehicles, were extremely high indeed. So it did very well in March. Let's turn our attention to the United States, and inflation from the figures yesterday, less than originally thought. However, I think most of the attention is going on the Federal Open Markets Committee comments that the banking crisis may well form a recession as the year goes on. ChatGPT is also may well be used as an algorithm for looking at the way stocks are going to behave. Now, as you know and I know, that the way to look at stocks is to say, well, what do these news headlines mean as far as that particular stock is concerned? That's what this algorithm is doing, but it's meant to be actually quite a good thing. If you want to read a good book about it and how things actually do depend on speed, read the Flash Boys book by Michael Lewis, which is part of my bookshelves here, and a very, very good book. Not so much on algorithms, but being able to act before the rest of the herd. Apple is going to open its physical stores in India. Mumbai open on April the 18th. Delhi open on April the 20th. All part of Mr. Cook's feelings, that CEO Tim Cook's feelings that maybe India is a growth opportunity that Apple doesn't want to miss out on. And at the moment, people tend to have low to mid-end smartphones, but they're hoping that India may well be, they may well want to buy iPhones there. And also Apple is looking to make MacBooks in Thailand, I understand from the latest wires on that story. Biden's visit to Northern Ireland. The problem with Joe Biden is that he needs to be very careful about his Irish background, not Northern Ireland, but Ireland itself. And this is part of the problem. What he's doing is he's been dangling billions of dollars, $6 billion worth of carrots in front of Northern Ireland. If the DUP were to jump on board and then Stormont were to operate as a proper Houses of Parliament, his job is, he says at the moment, to keep the peace. And he's talking about a lot of unfinished business, but he needs to be very careful, and I'm sure he does understand the antipathy that exists between the island of Ireland and Northern Ireland, connected by land, obviously, but two very different thoughts about where they need to be in the future. The UK, Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, is worried about the snowballing effects of bank failures and so on. Now, not to say that the UK is about to enter a period of bank failure, but what the authorities are actually doing is to maybe insure more than the £85,000 that is insured at the moment, as far as deposits are concerned, in case of bank failure, up to the US level of $250,000, which would be quite considerable. These are the kind of problems that he's thinking about at the moment. The latest blow to the City of London and its stock market comes from a commodities broker called Marek Spectron, which is expected to have a big IPO fairly soon, but it's also mentioning New York as well, and this is felt to be a threat to the future of the UK stock market. It's not a huge IPO. They're thinking about $650 million to $800 million if it were to happen in New York, but the very fact that it's mentioning New York, it may join the other companies that want to list over there. And I'll finally give you the commodities. As far as oil's concerned, crude is up again very, very slightly. I have my doubts about this because I don't think the news from the United States has sunk in yet, but there is apparently an immediate shortage of oil, but it's not expected to last. And I think the recessionary message that the FOMC is giving will probably have an effect on that market. And as far as gold's concerned, again, a lessening in inflation makes it less risky. But then again, that recession news hasn't sunk onto that market either. That is the global view this morning.
All right, thank you very much, Michael. Let me ask very quickly around Apple going into India. How well do you think this would affect sales in India of Apple products or the iPhone, bearing in mind that in 2019, they had only 1% of the smartphone market, and this year they're looking at about 5% competing with the more favored Xiaomi or Samsung. How do you think this would affect sales of iPhones in India?
I think if you look at China, for example, the luxury goods market is growing there. No reason to suspect the luxury goods market won't grow in India. The other phones are much less expensive than iPhones, and iPhones banking on that. And particularly as it is also a place where iPhones will be manufactured and assembled there. So I think that Tim Cook is taking a gamble on what is seen to be, to all intents and purposes, a very fast-growing economy. And I think that what he's betting on is that people will buy the more expensive iPhones. That's all I can say about it at the moment. But I mean, that's what CEOs do. They look at a market, see what the price pressures are, see what the competition is, and that the competition is low to mid-level cost, and what they're hoping for is more people will buy luxury branded iPhones.
Well, Michael, yesterday, President Biden, speaking in Belfast, was promising the parties in Northern Ireland billions of economic investment from the United States if the parties will agree to work together. Do you think that is going to make a difference and encourage, the warring parties to come together, even if we don't know as of now the details of that proposal? And then the second thing will be the U.S. Yeah, the FOMC. There was great optimism about the CPI, Consumer Price Index, and then all of a sudden, the federal minutes came yesterday indicating that core inflation is very high, and there could also be other higher costs, which ruined the day for investors. But everyone is looking forward to the producer price index today, which is likely to give an impression of how dire the situation may well be. What do you think that will happen now that everybody is talking about recession and all the indexes went down yesterday? So what do you think will likely happen today with the producer price index?
I think the time to ask that question is probably at the end of the US play tomorrow, when the banks have started started on their reporting season, because we'll really find out what worries the FOMC, as far as I can see, is the fact that any reduction in lending from banks will mean that companies are not necessarily expanding in the way that they want to, and thus they see a recession. I think the for this month at least, or for last month rather, reflected on this month's figures, the inflation numbers are not really the thing to look at. I think far more important is that horrible phrase, but it's there, the mood music coming out of the FOMC, and this is what they're worried about. But I think that good job the weekend's coming up, because it gives everybody a chance, a bit of reflection. But they're going to see JP Morgan, they're going to see Wells Fargo, and there's a couple of others coming out, which names escape me at the moment. But I mean, there are another couple. So we'll basically get an idea of whether there has been a capital flight from the major banks, because I think that's where the problem is. It's not an existential banking problem; it's a regional banking problem. And what I would hope is that these figures reinforce that view. They may not, of course. Joe Biden, as I said before, has got to be very, very careful indeed. He's dangling a carrot in front of Northern Ireland. As you say, we don't know what that is, but we think it's about $6 billion worth of investment. But he's spending much more time where he believes his family, or he's pretty sure his family came from, in Ireland itself. And of course, the Unionists in Northern Ireland don't like that at all. So is he trying to fix it? Might they listen? They may do, but that's what you do. You take a carrot with you, and that's what the carrot is. Whether the carrot works or not, don't know yet.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Now, for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri is here. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning to all our viewers. We continue with coverage from the spring meetings, World Bank, IMF. IMF, of course, putting out another report, a fiscal monitor with respect to the fiscal position of a number of nations across the country, across the world. Nigeria, of course, in focus. Again, telling, advising the Nigerian government to increase revenues and reduce subsidies. So if you take a look at this report from them that just was released for this month, this is the fiscal monitor on the path to policy normalization. Very interesting quotes and analysis from the IMF. Here's something on debt. Now we underline this in some. I remember yesterday we were talking about advanced economies, emerging markets, and then LIDCs. So this is LIDCs, as low-income developing countries. Debt is projected to continue rising. They highlighted Nigeria, and some have asked for debt relief under the Group of 20 common framework. They included Chad, Ethiopia, Ghana, and Zambia. So that's the first thing that's highlighted. If we just a refresher on our debts, according to the Debt Management Office, full year numbers for 2022, increase of 17%, approximately 46.25 trillion. This does not include ways and means. So that is to be noted as far as our full year debt rise. States, we've been talking about the states a whole lot. 5.3 trillion, 20% increase for the states. A number of these states are facing high debt, low revenues, disproportionately dependent on FAC allocations. Lots of work to be done there. They also talked about our revenues. So now combine these two. So, in 2022, tax to GDP ratios in low-income LIDCs, low-income developing countries, remain on average 4.7%. 13.5 percentage points lower than those in emerging markets, your Brazils, your China, your Turkey, and advanced economies respectively. And then underline, in some cases, total revenues remain exceptionally low. Nigeria at 8.8% and Bangladesh at 8.7%. That's your tax to GDP. So you're not collecting. So you've got really high debt, which they are projecting is going to increase because you got to borrow more. And then you've got exceptionally low tax to GDP ratio. So you can see the imbalance there. And then they also went on to talk about energy subsidies. So you throw that into the mix as well. There was a quote on the energy subsidies where they said that there are a number of low-income developing countries whose energy subsidies account for about 2.2% of GDP. So essentially, you've got high debts that is still rising, you've got exceptionally low revenues, and then you've got your energy subsidies, and they highlighted Nigeria as well as being one of those countries whose subsidies are accounting for about 2.2% of GDP, which again is a reason for the country to remove them. Whether or not they remove them, that's another case, but then they've been banging this drum over and over and over again. So that's on the IMF side. On the corporate Nigeria, some big news there. Billionaire Femi Otedola has acquired about 5.52% stake, about 2.24 billion shares in Transcorp PLC. Transcorp, of course, is the conglomerate. They've got businesses in oil and gas, in power, in hospitalities with the Transcorp hotel. And so this is pretty big news because this takes him to second place in terms of shareholders. Now, we've got two of these to show you. This is, of course, Transcorp PLC's largest shareholders as far as their 2022 company financials are concerned. So UBA Nominees is the largest shareholding. That's a private company, got a couple of directors on there. Then you've got Tony Elumelu. If you combine his direct and indirect holdings through Hare's Holdings, about 0.67 here, 0.76 there, you add everything, he's second place in 2.06%. Then Stanbic IBTC Nominees 0.99. Then Mike Adenuga. This is through, we look through their financials to pull out this information. Now, if you go to the projected largest shareholders, if you take a look at what that would look like, what that would look like with respect to what Otedola now being the second largest shareholder, he would now be at 5% with an Antonio Lumila at 2.07, and then you'd have the rest of the Stanbic IBTC's Mike Adenuga and so on. So that's essentially what we're seeing. Now, what's the strategy here? Is he seeing perhaps some potential in the power sector? Because remember, he's the largest shareholder in Geregu Power, which of course is the only electricity company that is listed on the stock exchange on the NGX. Is he seeing an opportunity there? Or is this a big flex? Is this a strategy to where, with what you saw with First Bank, where he, retained pretty much a pretty large shareholding there? What's the strategy? Now, it should be noted, talking about First Bank, I think about 4 Geregu Power PLC directors hold board seats on First Bank. So I think Akin Femi, who's the CEO of Geregu, has a seat on First Bank, and you've got Julius Otoga, who's the deputy CEO, a board seat on First Bank Holdings, and then I think First Pensions and First Bank Merchant Bank. So you've got about 4 board seats. So the question now is, how many board seats would he get? That's Femi Otedola on Transcorp going forward. Now, we haven't heard from Transcorp yet. We do expect to get a notification sent from the company to the NGX, to the stock exchange, stating that, hey, look, this is the newest shareholder that we have. But it's pretty exciting stuff if you think about what's going on in corporate Nigeria. Very
exciting stuff. And like you asked, the question is that what is Femi Otedola playing at in terms of, Transcorp has demonstrated that it's grown in profit. It's become a very profitable company in the last 1 year. So you would imagine that it is one that any investor, perhaps anyone would want to buy into. Our latest figures released financial results for Transcorp for 2022. Revenue rose by 21%. So that's from 111.2 billion naira to 134.7 billion naira in the last year. And also looking at the other areas, they've also ventured into oil and gas, also made inroads into power. Again, the question would be that so in terms of Tony Elumelu, I know looking at the numbers just on screen now, UBA Nominees Limited, would he have any advantage in that because he also has shares, stakes in UBA? Yeah, so the thing is, the UBA Nominees is an entity on its own, right? It's listed as a private firm. Yeah. So but he is not, and if you go to the financials for Transcorp, where we drew these numbers from, his holdings account to only 2%. That's it, as far as him directly and his indirect holdings. So that's not part of UBA Nominees is an entity, only a private entity. So what now happens? What now happens? We're all going to be monitoring the share price today and see whether this will trigger Transcorp to want to buy more, or Lumina to want to get more holdings there, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's we need to see more of this. And this is good for the economy generally, as far as holdings in companies.
Watching other people's wealth. And how they create wealth and prosperity. Yes. It's a very interesting sport.
It's fun stuff.
That you economic analysts engage in. But I would like to say, yes, congratulations to Femi Otedola. He's now effectively the largest single individual shareholder in the Transcorp PLC, which is one of the largest business conglomerates in Nigeria. The other body that has more shareholders is a corporate, unit, UBA Nominees, with about 9.25%.
Yes.
And now Otedola has 5.52%, largest single individual shareholder. He's also the largest single individual shareholder in First Bank Holdings, FBH, having crossed the 5% threshold. And in Geregu, he owns 90% of the shares. But the concern here is that would there be a bidding war in Transcorp, as we saw in First Bank Holdings. But you see, these are corporate players, these are investors. They will follow the money, they will make the investments. But, you know, congratulations to Femi Otedola. He keeps showing a lot of creativity in terms of how he expands his scope. And in such a manner that, in fact, some people who know him have been saying, well, maybe we should form a committee of people who know Femi Otedola to say, why are we struggling, waking up so early in the morning to come and talk on television when we know a man like Otedola, we know Aliko Dangote. Why don't we just say, oh, look, I don't have to work again. I know somebody who, you know, can just put me on a register and I can relax. But, you know, that's on the lighter side. But it's good to see this, you know. But the more important thing is that these investors, whether it's Mike Adenuga or Femi Otedola or Tony Lumelu, who is chairman of the Transcorp PLC, they have faith in the Nigerian system.
Indeed.
And with their faith in the Nigerian system, they continue to create opportunities. They continue to create wealth and spread prosperity. You know, and I think that that is important. And that's why that interface between the public sector and the private sector, between government and private business, is important. Creating the enabling environment that those who have chosen the investment line, the business line, you know, can continue to be encouraged, whether they are running media houses or they are running, you know, bigger conglomerates. Quickly, on the report, the fiscal monitor report by the IMF, is titled On the Path to Policy
Normalization.
Normalization. So the big thing for me are the recommendations they are making. They are talking about, one, increase in tax.
Yes, your favorite topic.
Widening the tax base.
Yes.
Removing fuel subsidy. Reducing the country's debt burden.
Yes.
And then they sounded the alarm that, in fact, Nigeria is going to borrow more.
Oh, yes.
A number of things that we have had before, you know, create new taxes to create, to widen the space and to manage debt. But would Nigerian leaders listen? Because there's always a lot of skepticism about this. When you say increase tax, yes, even if the people want to pay tax, see, the problem in Nigeria is not about the tax, really. You can widen the tax base. Nigerians are very skeptical about tax administration.
Indeed.
You collect our tax, you go and use our tax to do jamboree, or to have a lot of geishas, as the Russians called it. You know, that's the problem. And the bigger problem is the trust deficit.
Indeed.
So these prescriptions may work elsewhere, but it's very difficult to work out those prescriptions in Nigeria. In a country where you will be told that customs is going to spend billions to acquire 330 vehicles. What kind of vehicles are those?
Right.
And then removal of fuel subsidy. It's a big argument now. IMF can say remove fuel subsidy. Yes, local economists are also saying so. But if you remove the subsidy, who is going to benefit from it? Will it be the same experience whereby, you know, the rich benefit and the poor, like you and I, and no, I don't know whether are your fault.
I'm poor, I'm struggling. I'm struggling.
No, you are not one of us. Where they suffer. So that's where the challenge is. It's not about the prescriptions.
Yes.
It's about leadership. It's about the political will to make a difference.
Indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.